My name is Rachel Rofe. I created the show because I wanted to help you see that if you have a choice, you can choose a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in a pretty fortunate position. You have free will, ability to connect to the internet, and access to all kinds of new education. This podcast is meant to help you make the most of your good fortune. We talk with all kinds of people here from all walks of life because I want you to see that no matter what your situation, there's always a way to create a life that you're proud of. Hello everyone! Today we're here with Jordana Jaffe. Jordana is co-founder of Magical Business Academy and is not your run-of-the-mill business coach. She's a business-savvy, affectionate, and magically centered creator of life-transforming business strategies that not only make your business sparkle, but also your overall life. Through inspiring and cozy retreats, Jordana and her co-founder and wife, Jenna, uplift female entrepreneurs into the spirit of centering on their passions, living out every dream they desire, and transitioning their businesses into successes with ease. Through glitter, comfort, and undying support and belief, Jordana gives her clients what can only be described as the best and most magical support you'll ever find. And I've known Jordana now for, 9 or 10 months. We met in a mastermind together, and after we met, it turned out that we lived like 4 blocks from each other and had a bunch of random people in common, and I've just absolutely loved getting to know her. I think that she's just going to add so much value to this podcast because she's just crazy brilliant and just does such a spectacular job of combining both hustle, getting a lot of stuff done, but also she makes time for just being cozy and having so much ease. And she just makes things like cycling and having fun, knitting, all the things that she loves. She makes it as important as her work, and she's still crazy successful. She's super organized and just has so many practical pieces to share that I think this is going to be just phenomenal. So thank you so much for being here, Jordana.
You're so welcome. It's such a pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me. And thanks for that introduction. It was so awesome.
I mean it. Usually I actually write down a few notes, but I knew I didn't have to with you. It would just be really easy to say all the great things about you.
So. Oh, well, I love you too.
So the intention behind this podcast, as you know, is to show people that if they have a choice, that they can choose a better life. So in that spirit, can you just take a minute to share with us some of the things that you're most proud of in your life?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. Generally speaking, some things that I'm really proud of is that I have found that I'm like an epic community creator. I really feel like I'm one of the ultimate connectors, and people apparently come to me a lot to see if I know someone or if I can connect them with someone. And 9 out of 10 times I can. And I've done Facebook threads connecting people, and it's just really cool to know that by doing something as simple and quick as, putting up a Facebook thread of where does everyone live or who needs to connect with who, that best friendships can be formed and that, you can find your next web designer. And I really like that. I love that. Also, I'm really proud of the fact that recently, I'm a pretty open book to begin with, but recently I've really been navigating a lot around shame and guilt and secrets and the things that we keep to ourselves and how much of a burden that is. And also the masks that we put on, especially as entrepreneurs and on social media, 9 out of 10 times on social media, everything's really beautiful and pretty. What I am proud of is that I've begun to be really intentional about sharing vulnerable stories about, the hard times in my business, the times that were really scary, with the hope that it will inspire and help others, which I think it's doing, hopefully. I'm getting good feedback about that. Other things I am proud of is that I recently had my first $50,000 month, which is something that I never thought I would ever have. Even if I did, it became real, which is a totally different playing field than imagining it. And then I think just in general, I'm really proud of the fact that, I've always kept the faith in matters of love and business. And I think that, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening can relate, there's ebbs and flows, and there's times that you're not in a relationship and you're like, am I ever going to meet anyone? Or there's times in your business that you're like, I am 2 seconds away from throwing in the towel. And I've been in both of those situations, but I am proud of myself for kind of staying in the game and keeping the faith and really honoring and keeping the vision very clear and focusing on that.
Those are some great answers. And seriously, everything you're saying, not only like 100% true, but I mean, the connection part. I actually just got back last night from a meeting with two friends that you introduced me to. Amazing people in Vegas, and I'm feeling so nourished just thanks to your connection. So it's amazing. And as far as your $50,000 month and you're being vulnerable, I keep thinking that like about it because, as you know, I've been going through a bunch of stuff, and I just keep thinking, well, Jordana did it, and look what happened to her on the other side. Like, and just because you were so vulnerable with everything, both in our mastermind, but also on your Facebook, I know you've inspired me, and I know that you've inspired so many other people too. I think that leads us great into the next question I was going to ask you because I think it's so inspirational. Can you tell people about a time, maybe even the most recent time, when you were just feeling super trapped and like things weren't going the way that you wanted, and kind of just what was going on then?
Yeah. So, only a few months ago, I was just in this place where I just felt tired. It wasn't even that, it wasn't tired, like sleepy tired. It was just emotionally drained. And I think, I was at a point that I had been business coaching since 2010. So, we're going on a few years. And I knew that what I was doing, not that I didn't want to be a business coach, but just what I was doing and the way I was doing it, like something wasn't fitting right. I was just so tired. And I remember speaking to our coach, Nisha, who I think you've interviewed already. And I was just crying to her, and I was crying, and I said, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And she's like, well, you're not going to get a job. And I was like, of course I'm not going to get a job. I've been like an entrepreneur for 8 years. Like, of course, like, duh, I'm not going to get a job. Like, we know that. So, it's kind of like I just had to keep pushing on. And I was so worried, not just like, I was just so worried about like my emotional capacity to like do anything, like from an energetic space, that I created this whole plan over the course, because I'm a pretty obsessive planner, for better or worse. And I created this whole plan to take this summer sabbatical. I have to like make $200,000 to like, I don't know. It was nuts. It was just like this crazy plan. And my wife and I, we found places in California to rent out. Like, it was just kind of like I needed like a rest. I wish I knew exactly what the turning point was, because that would have been really cool to share and also to remember. But like, it's all a little bit hazy. But what ended up happening, oh, I know what the turning point was. Yes. So the turning point was during that conversation with Nisha, when we decided that it was time to join forces with my then fiance, Jenna, because we always knew we were going to start a business together, but we just didn't know when. And once Tanisha was like, well, why don't you just start now? It just kind of added structure to everything. So I was like, okay, great. So like now I'll do like, one more program for the rest of 2014. And then in 2015, we'll get started. And just that direction and that structure, somehow like all the emotional drainingness and energy sucking, like it disappeared. And then the following month was the $50,000 month.
And the $50,000 month, like you didn't do anything with Jenna at that point. That was totally just your program. What do you think contributed to that? I mean, you were saying like the energy, like all the drainedness went away. Is it just because you knew that you had a plan after you did the program the last time?
After I spoke to Nisha, I didn't have a plan yet about what exactly to do. I think like I just started probably brainstorming and whatnot. And then like in terms of like what I attribute that month, like why that month was so successful, I actually wrote an article about it on the Huffington Post because I thought it was important to share. And what I attribute it to is a few things. And it's just so funny because a lot of them are not business related at all. For like multiple weeks while I was speaking to lots of people about potentially participating in one of my programs, I made it a point to do like to either go for like a long walk or go spinning every morning. So like it got my endorphins going immediately. The other thing that I did was that I made a commitment to write at least 3 thank you notes a day. And I also did that first thing in the morning. And what was so great about that is that what I've found, like during times when you're like in like a crappy money mindset and you're just like, whatever, not in a great space, writing like thank you notes or just like writing I appreciate you notes, whatever. Number one, it's a very grounding experience because you have to like do it with your hands. And like, how many things do we actually do with our hands nowadays? We're so digitized. Beyond that, it really anchored me into like, there's like things to be appreciative of. And the practice was really transformative. And then the third thing that I attributed it to, I made a point to take a stand for whoever I spoke to on the phone. And one thing I really stand for is people just making empowered decisions. And that doesn't mean saying yes. Like, I think a no is a great decision if they feel like they don't want to work with me. A lot of times in the past, if someone's like, oh, I can't afford your services or whatever, I'd be like, oh, okay, like, bye, like, take care. And I don't want to like bother them or like rustle their feathers. And I don't know, I didn't want to step on toes. But I've learned over the years that like it doesn't really serve me or them to end the conversation that way. And I feel like both parties probably get off the phone feeling crappy. So I made a point, if people were to say that, to really, I felt like that's when the real conversation began. So really being brave enough, because I don't know, I think it's kind of scary to have that kind of conversation with someone that you don't know very well, but to be brave enough to take that stand for people. And what ended up happening was that like a lot of people who initially said I can't afford it ended up like paying in full. So there you go.
Wow. And how are they doing? Are they happy now that they did it, do you think? Like, I guess I'd just love to hear more about the mindset, even for people listening, behind like initially being like, I can't afford it, and then changing their mind and going after investing in themselves and going full after it.
I think a few things. I think that in terms of, I have a potentially radical view on the notion of like the 4 words, I can't afford it, are toxic. And I also think that, and this is again my opinion, so take it or leave it, but I think they're an unintentional lie, which means that like we're not being entirely honest with ourselves. Now, I'm not speaking about humanity at large, as I'm sure a lot of people could make arguments about like people in third world countries and not being able to afford stuff. I'm talking about people that have resources, like can be resourceful with their resources. Using that as a disclaimer, I believe that when someone says that they can't afford something, it means one out of 2 things. It either means that they actually don't want something badly enough. They don't want what they say they can't afford badly enough, but they're just not taking ownership over it. So instead of taking personal responsibility and being like, I really don't want it badly enough, it's just blame it on the money, right? I can't afford it. So that's like part A, like that's one sect of why of the people who say I can't afford it. And the second part is people who really want it super badly, but just haven't thought creatively enough how to make it happen. Too often we just look at our bank account and we were like, okay, well, the numbers say this and the investment is that, and 2 + 2 = 4. Right. But there's so many ways to make money. There's so many ways to find money. And when you want something badly enough, when something is urgent enough, you make it happen. So one thing that I say to people on the phone, which totally sounds mega dramatic and, hopefully is never a scenario for anyone, but I think it really shifts that for them, is I say to them, if you had to come up with truly any amount of money, but just let's say like if you had to come up with $25,000 in the next 2 days, or, the person nearest and dearest to you would die or would, get sick or something, you wouldn't be like, I can't afford it. Like it's no longer a question. It's like, okay, this is happening, like it's totally happening, and now I just need to figure out how to make it happen, because that's high urgency. And that's why I feel like urgency, while it can feel really uncomfortable, can be such a gift, because it's a catalyst to make you do stuff. I feel like if someone wanted something badly enough, then suddenly, like if you open your mind enough, like you'll make things happen. And then what I believe, I'm pretty spiritual, and I believe that when you start taking those action steps and the universe sees you doing that, I feel like that's when the real magic happens. So that's my own take on the concept of not being able to afford something. And I share it with people when relevant on the phone with them. I mean, most people I've spoken to are open, like resonate with it, but like I totally get if people are triggered by it or people don't really want to resonate with it. So it's to each their own. But it doesn't feel good to say I can't afford something, and it doesn't feel good to hear that someone can't afford something, right? So like, why don't we change that? Why don't we, shift that?
I personally love that. And I can see where if people were to get triggered by it, they could make an argument like this is a way to like push me to buy something or something. But the thing is, then you just say like, no, I don't want to afford it. And that's it. Like, it's not about being put, it's about just owning your power.
Yeah, exactly. What I say to them is I'm not committed to you saying yes. Like that's not the goal of this conversation. The goal of the conversation is for them to make an empowered decision. And if their decision is like, like what you're offering really isn't what I want, like that's awesome. because that's an empowered decision, because it's an aligned and empowered decision. So I would rather them say no than and feel empowered than say yes and feel disempowered. That's what I take a stand for. I take a stand for empowered decisions, not for their yes. And I share that too. And I think that when they hear that, they're like, okay, well, she's not trying to sell me. She really just has my best interest at heart.
Exactly. I think that whether or not people sign up with you after that conversation, it's just a perspective changing thing to think about for really the rest of their life. Anytime they automatically start to go to, I can't afford it. Because really, anytime we have a thought that's disempowering, it's probably just the story that we're telling ourselves about it. So
oh, for sure.
I think that's great. And I'd love to switch gears and talk a little bit about how you're able to just schedule so much fun into your life, but still get so much done. So one of the things I'm curious about is, what does an average day look like for you?
That's a great question. I don't know how many people who are listening are familiar with Myers-Briggs, but it's just, for those who aren't, it's a personality test. And I am an INFJ. And the reason this is relevant to the conversation is that J, one of the things J represents is this high need for structure and organization. And I am like a very strong J. It's part of just my natural, I love spreadsheets. My signature to my email is loving spreadsheets. Like I use spreadsheets with all of my clients. I was a professional organizer before I was a business coach. So like, I just really like being organized. And I totally get that a lot of people might think that's mega weird and not relate to that. So the way that I do it is that I really just schedule things in advance. And I honor scheduling like client calls just as much as I honor scheduling spin classes, and just as much as I honor scheduling yoga classes. That was the kind of like the first part of your question in terms of that kind of stuff. I think that it's a matter of, for me, scheduling and drawing boundaries, and then making the schedule reasonable, right? Whenever I work with clients and we're doing their schedule, I always say, this is not the schedule of like the perfect you, because the perfect you doesn't exist, right? So if you're not a morning person, let's not say that you're going to be doing yoga in the morning, because you're not. And you're just going to end up feeling crappy because you never get to yoga, because just that's not your natural tendency. So it needs to be like realistic, right? I know I'm not getting to a spin class before 10:30. I'd like to, it's just not happening, or it's rarely happening. So a typical day nowadays, my wife Jenna and I recently got a dog, Ruby. She's adorable and 6 months old. And so a typical day is I will wake up and get Ruby. Ruby will wake up with me, and we go into the kitchen and I feed her breakfast. And while I'm doing that, I will oil pull and I make myself a green smoothie and I stretch. And while I'm stretching, I write what I'm grateful for. And I write on one page of my journal. And on the next page, I'll write what I'm excited about for the day ahead. At that point, usually my wife is up. So like then she can handle Ruby. Sometimes I'll bring Ruby to doggy daycare. And then it depends. Some days I'll have like, I don't know, 5 to 7 client calls. And that's kind of the bulk of the day. Twice a week, I schedule in going spinning. At some point, I'll meditate. I mean, it gets kind of murky, but basically, at least for the past 3 days, going strong, I've shut my computer off at 6 p.m., which is really, it's a little nerve wracking, but it's really great. And not only do I do that, but I won't look at my email or Facebook on my phone either. And it's really made me aware of like how much of an addict I am. And I'm sure a lot of us are. But so that's what a typical day looks like. So now the cool thing is that like after 6 p.m., I get to play even more. So it's like this invitation for me to say like to myself, well, like after 6 p.m., like, what do you want to do? How do you want to play? So, like on like some nights, like, we'll watch TV, but like I started knitting and I started reading a book. And so like sometimes I'll read a fiction book and a self-help book. So it's just it's a nice invitation to give yourself the space to navigate what you want to be doing when you're not working.
Yeah, I think that that's probably a big problem for a lot of like entrepreneurs, is just not knowing who they are when they're not working.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I felt that a lot. I think it's really easy to get carried away in that. And I found myself in that place like 2 years ago, and I was like, I don't remember what I like to do for fun. That does not work for me. And also the tricky part of it is that so many entrepreneurs truly love what they're doing. So they're like, this is fun. I don't need other fun. This is fun. I love like, playing on Facebook with potential clients and, but even if it's fun, which is awesome, I think what I've learned and continue to learn is that taking a step back and doing something like knitting or whatever else, even though it seems wildly unrelated to your business, will actually end up making you a better business owner because it refuels you in a way that, working endlessly on your business will never be able to.
So how did you start to remember or find out what you like to do for fun again?
I think this is not a surprise. I probably just wrote a list. There's been many times in my life that I've just decided to like anchor myself in writing a happiness list. So, or it can be a list and it starts out with saying I want, and then I kind of just let my head run wild. So yeah, I just started really reconnecting with myself and saying like, what do I really love to do? And that's the thing, when you give yourself the space to both like with time and just like brain space to think about what do I love to do, it comes back to you pretty quickly because you once accessed it probably not that long ago. So yeah, so I just discovered like what I really like to do, and I started doing it. That's the cool thing, it's one thing to know like you like to knit, but then like I was like, we're going to the knitting store and we're gonna get yarn and start a new project. So I think it's knowing what you like to do, and then let's say you love pottery, it's then signing up for the pottery class. It's actually taking action on what you then discover.
Now, for things like knitting, because you do them at home, and I know, like with Facebook and email and all these things, we get oxytocin when we get new messages and stuff, and that's one of the reasons why it's so addicting. So when your natural inclination, I'm sure, would be to go reach for your phone and check and see if you've got any messages, is there something that you tell yourself to stay connected to the knitting?
Oh, that's interesting. So if I'm engaged in the knitting, I'm not going to go to my phone. But like, for example, before I go to bed, like I always would check my phone. What I've been telling myself is like, I'm not like, what I crave is space. I also crave connection, which is like why it's tricky because Facebook gives connection. I guess I say to myself, like, no one's going anywhere. And I'd much rather, handle the new emails and handle all the Facebook posts, like when I'm calm and centered at my desk tomorrow morning. And like, what I realized is that when I don't step away from my phone, that as quiet as my surroundings might be, which actually are not that quiet because I do live in New York City, but even no matter where I am, like Facebook or just email inbox, like just the digital world is basically a never ending Times Square. It's just this endless noise. And it's this knowledge of like, I don't care that much to have that noise. It's not worth it because the noise can be so harmful and so oppressive. And then what happens is, you see an email and you're like, should I respond? Da, 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 da. Or you see a Facebook, I should respond. And it prevents you from being fully present.
Absolutely. During your day, well, two questions on this, but during your day first, like how often do you think that or how much do you work? I know you said you stop at 6. Are you like working pretty much from after your free writing until 6, or how does that work? And then I know you said also you have spinning and stuff too, but besides.
Yeah. So it depends day to day. I would probably say now that, work is a funny thing, right? So like in some ways, like I feel like I'm always working just because my brain is always like spinning, like, oh, like even if my computer's off, I could be like writing like ideas in my phone. Or right now I speak to clients 6 days throughout the month. So like those days are pretty filled. So it's interesting. If you look at there being 20 days in a month, 6 days of the month, I'm speaking to clients. So now we're at 14. And Fridays, I really don't like to work. So now we're at 10. So I guess for the remaining times, I won't really open my computer before 10 and I'll shut it off by 6. So I guess that's the longest I would go, but I would for sure take a break for either picking Ruby up from doggy daycare or having lunch and stuff like that. So it's not like this straight 10 to 6. So that's what it kind of looks like.
So that's pretty awesome. You're not working that much at all, really. Compared to like a $50,000 a month. And I'm sure that's just because you've structured things so amazingly. So how do you schedule time for, let's say, marketing your business?
A lot of the marketing that I do as of recent, so I'm an introvert. Unfortunately, it took me many years to be okay with the fact that I just don't like going to networking events. Yeah, I just don't like it. It's a very confusing contradiction how I like crave connection and yet I'm an introvert, but I know that there's sense in all of that regardless. So I do a lot of my marketing on Facebook, which is tricky because you can also be playing on Facebook. I think for me, it depends. It's not like a standard everyday thing. But what I have been doing recently is every day I think of like the top three things that I need to do that day. And usually two out of those three are marketing related ish, probably. But I'm in the midst of slash like I want to eventually have a business where you're not always marketing. I know they say to always be marketing, and I think there's various levels of marketing. For me, I guess just being visible on Facebook is a very subtle way of my marketing.
Yeah, okay. And then you said you have three things on your list each day. A lot of people say that. Can you talk a little bit more about how that works for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just paired up with someone else, and I used to be really bad at accountability, I think, because I always thought it was like a phone call, and I just found the phone calls to be annoying. But so we just text each other in the morning ish, morning before noon, I guess, and we'll say, like, what are the three things you're doing? What are the three things I'm doing? Check in at the end of the day. And what that really just does for me is that it focuses me, right? So I need to get really clear on what are these three things. And it's not easy for me because I'm like, I want 10 things, but I have to decide like only three things that are the most important. And it also holds me accountable. And she's holding me accountable too. And lastly, it's also a matter, it's a good practice in just acceptance because I don't always get the three things done. I mean, usually I'll get two out of the three things done minimum, but I don't always get three things done, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's hard to come by. I know I feel guilty when I don't get my things done. So that's great that you can just say that's fine. And I'm also curious, when you're working with people, do you find that that's one of their biggest problems is like creating the to-do list with the three things and not having these lists of like 500 things?
I think that people have, I mean, in terms of the people I work with, I think their struggles vary from a lack of clarity, even if they're like, one would say like established business owners, like a lack of clarity of what they want to do slash what they want to do next. I think a lot of what I work with is money mindset stuff and creating a plan. There's the mindset part of it all, and then there's the logistical side of it all, right? So making the plan, working through their schedule. Sometimes it's the to-do list, but not always. So it's really case by case. But I think something across the board would be just a plan, which I guess in the end becomes a to-do list. But it's not like they come with a to-do list and they're like, I need help with this to-do list. It's like together we create a plan, which becomes their to-do list.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you guys create a plan, do you have any tips for people who want to create one just about how to kind of get structure around their life?
Yeah, I think the most effective plan is, I mean, first you need to know where you're going to go, right? So the more specific you can get, the better, right? So it's kind of like saying, oh, I want to go to California. But like when you get to California, like where in California do you want to go? And you want to ultimately get to a place where you're going to an address. So the more specific you can be in where you're heading, where you want your destination to be, the more supportive the plan can be and the more deliberate and clear. And then I think that, the other thing that I really, really focus on with people is breaking things down into like kindergarten level baby steps, because a lot of times people either don't execute plans because the task in front of them seems too large and too overwhelming, or they're not really clear on what they need to do. So if you force yourself to just break things down into the smallest steps possible, then everything seems kind of like it kind of dilutes the charge that any task can happen. And it's a little crazy because one thing might be like go to the gym, right? So we should just go to the gym. But for someone that like sentence has a lot of charge, then it might be really helpful to be like, take out my sneakers from my closet and like put on my socks. And I mean, it sounds ridiculous and potentially beyond tedious and I don't know, a little nuts. I mean, I always say, like, is it working for you? And if that's what you need to do to make it work, then that's what you should do. So I always say the smaller the steps, the bigger the progress.
As you're saying that, I can totally get it because when I think about like making time for a class or something versus just I have a treadmill at my house and usually I just use that because when I think about going to the gym, I think about oh, it's going to be like an hour and a half because I have to go to the class, I have to go here, like I have to drive there, I have to drive back, change, shower, whatever. But when you're talking about it, it does somehow seem really easier to be like, I time out how long things are going to take and write them on my notebook, but like take out sneakers, change into workout clothes, get into car, drive to gym. It's like a series of small, no-brainer tasks at that point. So that's
exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Awesome. This has been really, really helpful. I think that, I'm just so in love with like practical steps, and I think you've given people so many different things between just like shutting your computer and shutting your phone off after 6, and how to make time for fun, and how to structure your day so that you get your things that you want to get done, and the gratitude. And there's just been so much. It's been so great. So thank you so much. And I know that people are going to want to learn more about you. So can you let people know how they can do that?
Yeah, so, we're in the midst of building our new website, which will ultimately be magicalbusinessacademy.com. But there's a chance that if you go to it when you hear this podcast, that you won't see anything. So the other best place to then go is Jenna and I created a really awesome private Facebook group where you can learn more about us and you can hang out, and it's just really a really fun place to hang. So I think the link is rachelrofe.com/Jordana. So you can spell my name Jordana. It's like Jordan with an A at the end of it. So that's where you can find me.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much for listening to A Better Life. You can find all show notes for this episode at rachelrofe.com. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you can automatically get access to all new shows. Let's also connect. Just go onto Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram /RachelRofe, and we can talk there. The opinions of all guests here are their own, and I'm not necessarily endorsing any of them. I do want to give you perspective, though. And always remember,